It is Saturday, January 31st, the last day of July. Where did the time go? But I must tell you the highlight of my past week. I had an opportunity to attend the Melania Trump movie on Thursday night at the Kennedy Center, and I walked away with a few observations. I mean, she is the most maligned, ignored, and deliberately misunderstood First Lady in modern American history. And listen, that judgment is not ideological. It is factual. No recent First Lady has been subjected to such sustained dismissal by the press, not through scandal, not through corruption, I might add, or even personal misconduct, but through a persistent refusal to engage her as a serious individual, which that movie showed in her own right. It's serious. You have no idea what she's obligated to do. And listen to this. She was rarely evaluated on what she did or say, but on what others projected onto her. I mean, just look at what others have said about her dismissing the movie. Don't watch it. It should never be produced. They like to talk about her accent, her reserve, her marriage, her silence. And yet, I give it to her with her discipline, restraint, dignity. She endures. And the release of that documentary centered on her, Melania Trump, while she remains a living public figure, has exposed just how entrenched that reflexive content remains. Listen, in parts of South Africa, theaters canceled screenings under political pressure, yes, not because the film violated standards or indicted harm, because her name alone was deemed unacceptable. It's truth. That decision should tell you so much about the film's content than about a global culture increasingly comfortable with cultural veto based on ideological discomfort. This is part of the problem in America. And even at the same time, elite legacy media. Did you hear Jon Stewart and what he had to say? Just canceling her, dismissing her, and other outlets rushing to render judgment without any kind of, I don't even think they ever watched the movie. I don't think they watched it. But yet they have this remarkable uniformity, okay? Reviews often dismiss the documentary before grappling with serious and substantive issues, framing it less as a personal narrative than as an extension of partisan combat. The tone was not merely critical, it was often scornful. Listen at them, as though curiosity itself were a concession. The unspoken message was clear. Some stories are not worthy of fair hearing, regardless of their merit. That's why for me as a broadcaster, I had it to see myself. And what is striking is the contrast between the treatment of Melania Trump and the norms routinely afforded to other first ladies. Now, let me tell you something. Michelle Obama was maligned and was scorned, but she was never dismissed. Not the way Melania Trump has been. Privacy in others has been praised as strength. In her, it was cast as coldness, aloofness. Reserve elsewhere was called elegance in her indifference. And when she declined to perform the confessional politics, you know what I mean? Now demanded by modern media, she was credited with autonomy but punished for non-compliance. None of this requires agreement with her husband's politics. It requires only intellectual honesty. A culture confident in its values does not need to suppress or prejudge a woman's story because of her last name is Trump, nor should it fear allowing audiences like you to decide for yourselves what you think about this movie. Melania Trump never governed, never legislated, and never sought to be protagonist of her husband's presidency. She chose a narrow, role-focused, controlled, and deliberately private. That choice, in an era addicted to spectacle and performative vulnerability, became her greatest offense. I congratulate her on her movie. I'm so glad Patrice Onwuka is joining us. What about this maligning and dismissing her and how she decided to do it on her own terms, Patrice? And welcome.
Thank you so much. Good to see you, Armstrong. This is what we call progressive privilege, where conservative women are dismissed, demeaned, belittled, forgotten, overlooked. You talked so well about that. Very often we see female leaders in the Trump administration in particular, both administrations, who hold high positions, who have done, admirable, laudable things. I think about Kellyanne Conway being the first female to lead a presidential candidate into the White House by winning his campaign. Think about Susie Wiles now, who's the first female chief of staff. It was just a Vanity Fair piece that was really meant to undermine the relations in the White House that we actually saw about her. So I love that Melania Trump has taken ownership of the narrative about her, put out a documentary really giving us a behind-the-scenes look at her role in the White House this time around. And I think she's setting a statement. The first time, she didn't know what to expect as a first lady. She still had a child who was underage, and balancing the demands of the president, of the first lady office, of being a mother and being in a public spotlight in just a way that she probably had never imagined being. And now we see her coming back with a sense of purpose, of sharpness, of mission, that she is handling things the way she wants to. And I loved an interview I saw with her this week where she said, "I choose when I speak. And I choose when I do not have to speak." And I love that, because very often the media wants to goad you into responding to every and anything. And she's saying no. The only time the media liked Melania Trump was when they thought they could create some sort of narrative that there was a division in between her and the president. After that, they haven't cared about her. So this is beautiful to watch. And by the way, I'm a huge fan of her fashions and her shoes.
And it's still... She endured, not loudly, not bitterly, but with a steadiness that history may yet judge more generously than the moment in which she lived. And let me just tell you, the documentary, cancellations, and the hostile reviews together reveals less about Melania Trump than about the institutions reacting to her. They expose a media and culture class increasingly unwilling, Patricia, to separate critique from contempt, disagreement from dismissal. And in the end, the question is not whether one admires Melania Trump, it is whether we are willing, or whether we're still capable of allowing a woman to be seen fully, even when she refuses to play the role others have written for her. Thank you. Yeah. So let me say something on this track. Let me just continue. The vitriol directed at Nicki Minaj across social media for expressing respect toward and measured support for President Trump says far more about our current climate than it does about her views. I mean, Nicki Minaj did not call for censorship. She did not incite harm, Patricia. She did not demand ideological conformity from anyone else. Now, she's vulgar. She uses profane language. So does the president. He just doesn't use it anymore. She exercised a basic American freedom, the right to speak, to question, and to choose without permission from the crowd. That right does not evaporate when a celebrity opinions conflicts with expectations of an online audience and legacy media. I mean, and listen, Patricia, too often political discourse now operates as a purity test. Deviate even slightly from that approved narrative, and the response is not debate, but condemnation. And the reaction to Nicki Minaj, no matter what I may think about her music and her rap, it reflects this reality. Her refusal to conform has been treated as betrayal rather than autonomy, as if admiration, Patricia, respect, a dialogue across political lines were moral transgressions rather than democratic virtues. Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. Well, let's think about what we saw this week with Nicki Minaj. She was on stage to tout the Trump accounts, which are $1,000 seed investments for every single baby born in this country going forward, teaching financial literacy lessons and also setting millions of kids potentially up for a start at adulthood. But she's being maligned because she said, she's a supporter of the president. This is not surprising. This is an intentional tactic, not just about silencing her, which at this point she said, you can't and no one will silence me, but it's about all the other conservatives or independent thinking people of color, blacks in particular, who who have been quiet, who tend to hide their viewpoints because they don't want to be canceled. And so by maligning her, they're trying to continue to silence those regular folks. But as I'm seeing on social media, you yourself, myself, we have more public spaces, and we're not afraid to say the truth and to be, have independence of thought. But I also am starting to see a lot of Black people who are recognizing a lot of the things they've been told about the Republican Party, about conservatives, are pure lies. And they're also recognizing that the Democratic Party and the leftists have done nothing to support and uplift the Black community, but have actually traded the Black vote, the Black community, the Black resources for illegal immigration over the past few years. So, she's going to take a lot of heat. She can withstand the heat. She's in a strong financial and pop culture position to be able to make the stands, and maybe it'll encourage some others who will agree with her behind the scenes in the back of the recording studio, but will never come forward publicly because of their fear of losing what they have built.
And this is my question to you before I go to break. Is it possible to respect a president without endorsing every policy? Is it possible to support certain ideas while criticizing others? And is it possible, indeed necessary, to separate political disagreement from personal vilification? The inability to make those distinctions is not moral clarity, it is intellectual rigidity. And I want to say this to Patrice before I go to break. I saw she and her son at the White House when the president was talking about milk, and I could tell it was unscripted. Seeing your young son ask that bold question of the president of the United States, I was so proud of you. Let me just say, there with the president of the United States, your son would have that memory for the rest of his life. What a great tribute to you and your husband and your family.
Thank you. Yes, that was a moment that was unscripted. I didn't expect him to step forward. But you know what? This is the President of the United States.
Yes.
And if we had been invited by Joe Biden, we would have taken it just as seriously, shown up and afforded the very same respect and accorded the same respect. And unfortunately, we're at a point, Armstrong, where people can't separate politics and policy and personal, to the point where, our Tesla was vandalized last year when the vandals were going out, to the point where our Trump support signs were taken down out of our yard. They were stolen and destroyed. It shouldn't be that case. At the end of the day, you can be good people and think good things and just disagree with who you vote for and who you support. But at the end of the day, we all believe in the same thing. We want our families to be safe. We want to be able to take care of our families, and we want our children to do better than we did, no matter what policies get us there.
And I'll say amen. When we come back, Raynard Jackson will join the conversation. I'm Armstrong Williams. And welcome back. We're joined now by Raynard Jackson. Let me just say that what happened to Alex Pretty is really heartbreaking. He was a nurse, a son, a friend, a human being whose life mattered. His death should never be minimized, justified, or turned into a political weapon. The video, though, 11 days before his death, does complicate the narrative that he was entirely removed from conflict and ignoring that complexity, risk, romanticizing danger in ways that don't help anyone heal. After that incident, in truth, he should never have returned to protest, especially knowing how volatile the moment had become. Saying that is not blame, it is honesty. I mean, he was cursing, he was kicking at the vehicle. Did you see it? Now, let me admit this. To some, the video feels like ammunition in a debate, a way to rewrite who he was or what he stood for. To others, it is a painful reminder of how quickly anger, frustration, and fear can push people into choices they later regret and cannot change. Both reactions are understandable, but let us be absolutely clear about this. Making a mistake, Raynard, and Patricia, does not mean someone deserves to die. Even confrontational or reckless behavior does not justify lethal force. I mean, there were 6 men, 6 ICE people surrounding him. They took his gun, and they still shot him. They were in total control. Listen, violence, even in symbolic or provocative, it's provocative, should never be met with a fatal response. Whatever errors Patrice made, the response that ended his life was disproportionate and catastrophic. And I'll say this because I know I can see Raynard's temperature rising over there. Let me just say this. Moral clarity requires holding 2 truths at once. Alex Paredes was a flawed human being, like we all are, and his killing demands transparency, accountability, and restraint from those entrusted with power. Justice is not rage, Raynard. Healing is not denial. Truth spoken with humility is the only path forward. Raynard.
Well, Armstrong, God is still working on me. I ain't there yet, but I have no sympathy for Patrice whatsoever. Because zero. Because number one, you don't go to a rally with this type of atmosphere and theatrics with a gun. Licensed to carry, he did everything by the book, but you're bum rushing the police and you're getting into a tussle with them. Not only this one time where he got shot, but the week prior, he got his ribs broken doing the same thing. He knew what he was doing, but somehow he made a bad decision and now has to pay the price.
He's paid the price.
I'm so tired of hearing Americans tell me what their rights are, but unless you have a responsibility, there are no rights. Rights and responsibilities go hand in hand. Yeah, he had the right to protest peacefully. Armstrong, there's nothing about his interactions with the police in the past 2 weeks were peaceful.
Let me interrupt you a minute, because I want to make sure our listeners are hearing what you're saying, because I think the responsibility, accountability, I don't think anybody would disagree with the judgment, but are you just saying he deserved to die?
I don't make a judgment on what he deserved. The police respected and reacted.
But I need you to answer. Do you think he deserved to die?
Based on his actions, yes.
Patricia?
No, I don't. Did he need to be there? That's his right to protest. Should he have moved back? Could he himself have tried to de-escalate the situation? He probably could have. But at the end of the day, after watching that video from so many different angles, and even knowing that days prior he assaulted a police ICE vehicle, in that moment, with so many other ICE agents already restraining him, and his gun had already been removed from his body, I don't think you can justify the shooting at that moment. And it's so interesting that we saw Tom Homan this week, who is now taken over as being the lead man for the administration, saying the same thing. He said this was not beautifully handled. This was not well handled. And he called for restraint. Really, he brought the temperature down. He walked into the space and literally turned the atmosphere down there. And that's what's needed right now. But I don't think you could justify that shooting. I don't.
What should we learn from the administration and you're welcome to say you don't think he deserved to die. It's okay, because sometimes we get caught up in the heat of the moment. I think you want to say that. You don't think he deserved to die.
Armstrong, if I'm in the shoes...
No, just a simple question. Answer. You don't think...
Yeah.
Okay, let me move on then. Let me move on. So what do you think the policy should be now with this administration to lower the tone like what Tom Homan is doing? Should we change the deportation strategy? Because let me tell you something. Kristen Noem, what she was telling was an outright fabrication.
Yeah, no question.
I couldn't believe that. The secretary, I was shocked. It was just an outright fabrication, but why?
But I'm saying, you just said two things can be true at the same time. I agree, Kristi Noem's characterization of what happened is totally offline. But Trump became president again on the premise of mass deportation. That should not be changed.
But I don't think it was defined the way we're seeing it today. I don't think many Americans, when they thought about mass deportation, I think they were thinking about shutting down the borders, getting rid of gangs, getting rid of criminals that threat to our society. Not everyday people who have no criminal record, and you just deporting them. I don't think that's what people expect. And I think if you look at the polls, even Republicans don't like the way these mass deportations are being carried out. So I'm just asking you a simple question. How can it be better? It's a question I'm asking.
Enforce the law. I wouldn't care if you were Mother Teresa, you've been here 40 years, either you're legal or you're not.
And you should be deported?
Yes.
Really?
I'm to the right of Pat Buchanan on that issue.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, Armstrong, isn't it amazing that
if you have no criminal record,
you do have a criminal record. You came in illegally. That's your first crime. Then let's talk about that, Armstrong.
Should we give them a chance to become legal instead of just deporting them?
Okay, hold on.
Let me just ask you a different. I'm trying to help you here, brother.
No.
I'm trying to help you.
I'm to the right of Pat Buchanan on this issue. No. Okay, they come over illegally. First crime. Second crime, more than likely, they've used fake Social Security numbers. They lied on job applications. So you all are making it seem like...
Not with farmers. Farmers know exactly what they're getting.
And that's one weakness I see in the Trump's approach. I want to see employers going to jail because a lot of these employers are intentionally hiring illegals because they want cheap labor.
Patrice.
Listen, I actually agree on the point of holding employers accountable.
Yes.
Because to the point about the agricultural industry, they've been saying, oh, you know, prices on cabbage are going to go up because we don't have people to work the land. Well, we shouldn't give a green pass to people who are here illegally, working without proper permits and documentation. So I agree there. We also have to acknowledge that there's been some significant progress made. 2 million people have already self-deported, which is actually a good thing. Leave. You've been given a plane ticket paid for by the federal government, and then you can get in line and come back one day eventually legally. I think those efforts most Americans would agree with. You know, when it comes to those who are the criminal illegals who are carrying out, you know, dangerous crimes against their communities, the people that they're in, I think that's where Americans really want to see a lot of the emphasis take place. There is, though, a policy struggle here, probably within the conservative world, about whether you need to go further than that. And I think over the next 3 years, that's where we're going to see that play out. But that's where you can start to talk about asylum law changes, talk about our H-1B visa processes and all of the different types of visas that you can get in this country. You know, where can we reform them in a way that says, you know what, we want as many people to be here legally as possible, and then we're going to figure out what we're going to do with the millions of people who are here, particularly those who came through the Biden administration, encouraging them to go back out and come back in the right way. But you still have 2 million illegal getaways. These are the people Tom Homan was mentioning in his press conference, who the federal government is extremely worried about because they didn't surrender themselves at the southern border. They have disappeared into the United States, and because there's no vetting, no fingerprinting, there's no record of them with the federal government, we don't know why they're here. And that could be for the cartel purposes, that could be for terrorism purposes. And so if the attention and the focus is on trying to figure out who those guys are and removing those, then I think you'll start to see a turnaround in the support, particularly among Republicans going into the midterms behind the administration's immigration processes.
I got a compromise for you that I think I'll meet you halfway on. Those illegals that you described that, you know, clean record, et cetera, here's what I'm willing to do, Armstrong, and you tell me if you want to make this deal right now. I will give them legal status, not citizenship, legal status, as long as it's codified in law that they can never, ever, ever be a citizen. And they cannot sponsor anyone else coming to the country. But I will give them legal status.
Do you agree with that, Patricia?
I'd have to think about it. And gentlemen, I'm a naturalized citizen, meaning my family spent the time and money to come here legally. We didn't run across the border. We came here on a plane, and we went through all of the medical processes and shots that were needed to be taken. And so, you know, I, like many legal naturalized citizens, actually think it's not fair to grant full amnesty to people who didn't go through the arduous process that we did, selling everything we had to come to this country. And so I'm not sure if I'm willing to get full force behind full citizenship, but it's an interesting offer. I'll leave it at that.
How do we address someone I had a lot of respect for? How do we address the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, even John Fetterman, who's been more than fair, is demanding that she be fired. The president met with she and Corey Lewandowski for 2 hours in the White House this week. How should we address it, Patricia? I'm just at a loss, actually. And why was she mislead and not think that they were going to check the facts, look at the videos, just like you said to Raynard. I looked at the video. This guy did not deserve to die. This guy, they said he was a terrorist. He was wanted to massacre ICE. Ain't none of it's being true. That does not have the dialogue. But listen to me. You had to know you were not telling the truth. I'm just trying to understand what the mindset was.
I don't know her full mindset, but I can understand that sometimes leaders want to own the narrative, which can be can run very quickly. And so owning the narrative of trying to set this guy up as, what he didn't turn out to be, wasn't a saint, but also, wasn't a terrorist. Maybe in trying to own that narrative very early on without the facts, that may have been what motivated her. And you know what? We need someone who has a steady hand, who's going to give information that is going to be that's trustworthy. And I think that's why you see such a difference between Tom Homan and Kristi Noem and their approaches. One is very much aggressive, in your face, and she's done good stuff. I talked about 2 million people who self-deported. I think those are great ideas. But at this point, when the tensions are so high and the polling is changing, particularly going into the midterms, you need that steady hand to turn the temperature back down, and then for the administration to come across as much more competent and steady, and to ensure that this doesn't spread to as well.
We're going to keep Raynard. I know Patricia's staying with us. Sam Faddis is going to join with us when we come back. We're going overseas. A lot of foreign policy to speak about today. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. I'm so glad Sam is with us today. I know you probably heard part of the conversation as you were waiting to come on. What is fascinating, Sam, today, there are incredible, powerful tools in ICE's arsenal to track suspects and protesters. They've got these biometric trackers, cell phone location databases, and drones are among the surveillance technologies that federal agents are tapping in their deportation campaign. Do you agree with these tactics? How should they use this arsenal, Sam?
I tell you my reaction. I did listen to part of the conversation you were having. My reaction is what I would like to see is more of a whole of government approach to this. If you have individuals that are here illegally, then I agree 100%. We should focus on employment. Why are we not focused on employers and stopping these individuals from getting employment and punishing employers who do employ them? Because obviously if you can't get a job and you can't support yourself, then the incentive to stay here goes away. There are a number of other levers like that. Why can individuals who are in the country illegally open bank accounts, rent apartments, and otherwise participate? I also, look, I'm all for the First Amendment and I'm all for protest. But what ICE Watch is doing on the street is obstructing federal officers in the performance of their duties and training people to do that and so forth. That constitutes a conspiracy. Those are federal offenses punishable by 20 years in prison. So why are you leaving it up to individual Border Patrol and ICE officers to deal with this physical confrontation in the street that obviously Americans don't want to see, and allowing those organizations to operate? So what I'd like to see is a more systematic, comprehensive approach to this that turns down the heat and takes this out of being a situation where we have continued violent confrontations in the street.
Were you encouraged by the fact that the president did speak with Governor Walz and the mayor Frey this week? And as Patrice pointed out, they've reached some kind of clarity of how they can collaborate to give more presence of the Minnesota police and back down on the presence of ICE.
I'm cautiously optimistic, but obviously what everybody feels is, okay, it's great to make that announcement. Now let's see what action is actually taken.
But do you believe the FBI should lead national investigations into federal agents' use of force?
I think I ask this question of you all the time rhetorically. Where is the FBI? When you've got a lot of nationwide efforts and organizational things going on here that the FBI should be dealing with. Again, I am not talking about preventing Americans from protesting, speaking. These are constitutional rights. But when you're training people to, as they refer to it, de-arrest individuals, and you track ICE officers as they do systematically through the city, and based on the information I'm seeing in anarchist publications, you're talking about roughly 4,000 to 5,000 people in an organized fashion in Minneapolis being vectored into confronting ICE in an organized fashion, again, trained explicitly to prevent them from performing their law enforcement duties. That is a conspiracy, and those are criminal actions because it isn't protest. And they're, again, punishable by up to 20 years in jail. Why do we allow that to continue? And then the inevitable is going to happen, right? ICE officers, Border Patrol officers on the street in this pressure cooker of a situation. And people are going to get killed. People are going to continue to get killed. And no right-thinking American wants to see that.
No, they don't. I wanted to get your assessment. Listen, there's this chatter that there's this possibility that Russia and Ukraine has finally come to a resolution to end this war, though Ukraine has not capitulated on the more demands on land from Russia. But, I asked you this question. How is it possible? Do you really see this coming to a close, or do you see this extending for some time into the near future? What gives you hope that there's even a possibility that they can finally find a resolution to this conflict? And listen, 2 million people died. 2 million died.
Do I think there will be a resolution? Yes. I mean, this year, yes. Hopefully within months. Why? Because ultimately neither side has any choice. Because the Russians are, running on fumes. And because Zelensky ultimately, when he's all done posturing, if he doesn't have the United States in his corner behind him, he's done. I mean, the Europeans always talk. They don't ante up. It comes down to if the Americans aren't there and walk away, he's done. That's always been the case for him. So he doesn't want to face it, and Putin doesn't want to face the fact that he didn't transform Ukraine into a client state, and so it will continue to be painful. But yeah, I believe we're reaching the point where neither one of them has a choice.
What do you think are the key sticking points in the negotiations, and what are the national security implications if the deal stalls?
Well, Zelensky still doesn't want to concede that he's going to not get all his territory back. That's the biggest one, right? He continues to hang on to that hope. For Putin, I think he wants to. At this point, I suspect his biggest concern is when we finally settle this thing and Ukraine is not owned by me one way or the other as a client state or outright, what exactly is going to be its status? How am I going to keep NATO from just simply flowing in there and preventing me with a de facto situation that it's now part of NATO? What kind of security guarantees do I have that I'll be any better off when this is all over? As I've said from the beginning, when you and I have talked about this whole thing, was always going to be an unbelievably painful negotiating process. It was never going to be quick and easy. But I do think ultimately they're going to be forced to agree.
I was talking to a colleague of mine who's returning home to Israel, and his concern was that the airspace was closing because his wife was telling him that other jets were flying over Israeli airspace, and because they're escalating the tensions with Iran privately, and they feel that Iran's response is going to be firing more ballistic missiles to Israel. I know the mainstream media here in this country is obsessed with what's going on in Minnesota, and they're not really covering the other issues like Israel, Iran, Ukraine. But is there an escalation that's happening?
Well, clearly we have moved military assets in and made preparations for the possibility of strikes on Iran. There are way too many pieces that have been moved on the chessboard. Whether there's a final decision that we're actually going to strike, I don't know. As you well know, I worked against the Ayatollahs for a long time. They're as evil as anything on the face of the planet. I would love to see a free Iran. I would love to see a free Persian people. As usual, when anybody starts talking about this kind of thing, what I'm going to say is, slow down, man. What exactly are we getting ready to do, and precisely how is this all going to work, and do we actually have a plan and a strategy? Because I'm unclear that we do. I feel like there are a lot of people running around now who simply have decided that if we bomb a bunch of places in Iran, the existing structure will collapse and it will be replaced by something dramatically better overnight. And I don't necessarily believe either one of those things. Again, as a guy who worked against the Ayatollahs for many, many years and with Iranian patriots against that regime, I would love to see them gone. I'm just not convinced that we really have a plan that we can execute to make this happen.
Now, I hope people listening are not mistaken by what I'm saying and what Sam is saying. Americans, we have assets on the ground in Israel, and we're preparing for something, okay? And I just happened to hear this offhand by someone who I have a lot of respect for, telling me about his wife and the jets flying over their airspace and they're closing down airspace. Something's going on there. So while your attention is focused on Minneapolis, listen, there is something that's really unsettling. And like Sam said, we just want to make sure we can replace it with a better regime or better leadership, because that doesn't always work out for us. In fact, it becomes actually work. One last question before I get Raynard and Patrice in this conversation. How are Europeans, allies, reacting to the U.S. domestic polarization? And I'm reading now where European leaders think that their biggest threat to their existence now is the United States.
Well, I mean, they're not reacting well. They certainly didn't react well to the entire Greenland issue. I mean, every European paper that I look at every day for weeks has been screaming about that kind of thing. Some of that is, fine, whatever. They're always screaming about something. Some of that is, I mean, frankly, I'm concerned about. I mean, in the extent that we've taken our eye off the ball and created tensions where I'm not sure that we needed to create those tensions. What did we actually achieve? Again, going back to an America First point, how did all of this benefit us? I mean, as I said a few moments ago, I was critical of the Europeans. I'm always that way. I mean, in my experience working abroad, they talk a lot and they don't line up with us every time we need them. But still, something we should take into account.
These are critical times, America, at home and abroad, and we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, Patrice, I know foreign policy is one of your strong suits. I'm going to give you a chance to respond to Sam and add your own perspective.
Well, you know, I'm curious about China here. Obviously, China is not directly involved, but a lot of this is proxy. And China certainly has an interest in supporting Russia and propping up Russia, but also in the Middle East. I'd love to see your take on what China is seeing in the United States' movements, as you were just mentioning before the break.
Sam?
Well, look, I 100% believe that China is the #1 strategic threat to the United States. I mean, I'm one of these guys that thinks when we decided to get entangled with communist China economically, it was probably the greatest strategic mistake we've ever made in the world. So, I mean, when it comes to something like Iran, you know, they partner with Iran in a variety of ways, the primary interest being them getting oil and them finding ways to stick it to us, to, you know, to use a technical term. And they don't want the Ayatollahs to go away. They certainly don't want an end state here where Iran is once again an ally of the United States, and, you know, back to the days of the strategic situation where we had the Shah. You know, to the extent to which they're going to go to bat for them and really go to the mat on this, I think is another question. But I have seen reports, sure you've seen them as well, of, you know, cargo flights going in Chinese aircraft landing in Tehran, bringing in God knows what in advance of what everybody thinks is going to be an attack.
Now, I am surprised that Venezuela and Maduro and the new regime is totally out of the press now. You hear nothing about it. What's the latest there, Sam?
Well, we have whatever arrangement we currently have with the folks that are in charge in Caracas regarding oil and so forth. But I mean, inside Venezuela, as far as I can tell, talking to a lot of old colleagues who worked that area for a long time, you know, nothing has really changed. I mean, we took one member of the mob. The mob is still in charge. Delcy Rodriguez and company are as bad as Maduro ever was. So, I mean, is there a strategic impact there? Yeah. Did we suddenly liberate Venezuela and turn it into a democratic state? Absolutely not. So, frankly, I don't know where that's going. I mean, I don't see how you're ever going to make that transition with those guys still in charge, which I think is what Machado is telling everybody every day. Is like, this is the same cartel running the place. You just took one guy out.
That's a fact. Raynard?
Yeah, Sam, I watch you on the War Room all the time. Great job. Here's my biggest concern about foreign policy. What Trump has done has drastically changed the way we approach foreign policy. The EU, NATO, all these global groups have been taken over by the global elite, and they only care about the bottom line, profit, money, and cheap labor. And so the biggest national security fear, in my view, Sam, is you had 100,000 illegals from China come across the border. Several of these people were intelligence assets from China, and we have no idea. And then this whole baby tourism thing, where a Chinese woman who's pregnant comes here, gets pregnant, and that baby is now an American citizen. China is thinking 30 years down the road, Sam, on this, and it's all coming through our borders, and no one is even addressing that issue.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Look, nobody has any idea really how many military-age Chinese males came across the border, right? And we never got any explanation for where they went or why they were here. And there were some pretty squared away guys who know what they were talking about down at the border over a course of years saying, I'm watching these guys come across the border, and I feel like what I'm looking at is guys straight out of Fort Bragg and Special Forces. Am I suggesting every one of those guys is some secret operative? That's not what I'm saying. The point is, that's a big issue. And we never made any effort to figure out where they went or why they were here or investigate them in any fashion, really. At that point, when they were coming across the border, even if we talked to them, we had reduced the questions we asked them to, I think it was a grand total of 5. And they knew in advance what they were going to be asked, and then we sent them on their way. Usually we transported them on their way. Okay, we also know that the Chinese have completely penetrated our critical infrastructure, right? Right, the FBI has been talking about that. All sorts of other preparation, including drones flying over U.S. military bases like Norfolk and Newport News, that nobody still has explained where they were coming from. We've got all kinds of indications of the Chinese having put in place, which is consistent with their strategy, and a capacity to begin any conflict with us right here on our soil in a really catastrophic way. And there is no ongoing effort the FBI doesn't begin to have its hands around that threat, which is simply unknown. The answer to any question you could come up with listening to what I just said would be, we don't know. That's the answer.
Patrice, you ever think about the fact that a lot of the chaos that we see in Minnesota, Minneapolis, across the country could be fueled by the CCP and other groups that realize that they cannot defeat us militarily, but they can with misinformation and disinformation, and what they do is further divide us as they sit back and watch these disruptions, because there's a fracture. And once there's a fracture, it creates the opportunity for the enemy to seize the opportunity.
Well, certainly online, that's where a huge part of this battle we're seeing. What people see, and you know, what comes up in your social media feed, for example, is one piece of it. But there are factories, and for misinformation factories, division stoking factories in Russia, for example, and not surprisingly, probably in China too, where they're exploiting the differences between the races, differences between in politics and the ideology here, just to drive Americans against one another. You know, whether some of these, the operations that Sam was talking about, whether they're funded by entities that exist overseas, that's another paper trail and money trail that I hope our federal government is starting to pursue. Because absolutely, the kind of coordination we're seeing on the ground in Minneapolis, I've seen some videos where you're listening to the calls between some of these women and men who are, you know, tracking and following these troopers. Where are they getting that kind of infrastructure, the needs that they have to carry out these tracking devices? All of that is paid for by someone. And I don't think it's all just George Soros and his son Alex Soros. It wouldn't surprise me if some of this is being funded by outside countries who have a very strong stake in making sure that Americans hate one another and are asleep at the external factors that are coming in.
You know, Sam, what intelligence challenges are top priority do you consider for our nation? And are we equipped to handle multi-theater foreign policy demands as we see go on in the world today?
No, we're not equipped. And one of the big issues is what you just touched on, which is intelligence collection. I mean, I can tell you that if the CIA is supposed to be moving at about 60 miles an hour, it's still in first gear. The number of assets the Central Intelligence Agency runs worldwide is ridiculously small at this point. Obviously, I'm not going to give you a number, but it's almost at a full stop. And domestically, in terms of counterintelligence, we're at least as bad off. I mean, we don't have an MI5, a domestic intelligence organization. The Bureau is supposed to do that. They have a whole wing that does that. And they're not getting it done. I mean, we're talking about foreign-funded networks. Okay, yes, it's not 100%. It's not just Soros. I mean, Neville Roy Singham is this billionaire guy, as one example, who works in Shanghai, and he's part of the United Front. He's lashed up directly with the Chinese United Front, which is their organization designed to, infiltrate us and cause trouble on our soil. And he funds, to the tune of many, many millions of dollars, virtually all kinds of outfits that are, neck deep in all of this trouble.
But didn't we try to deport him? Because I saw your latest article in A&D, which touches on exactly what Patrice just explained, is that it's time to take down these networks stoking violence in Minneapolis and elsewhere.
Well, he's out of the country. He operates from Shanghai. So he's sending the money and he's sending direction. But the people, including some of whom are relatives of his, that operate on our soil, no, we haven't deported them. We haven't shut them down. And this, it comes back to sort of the point of origin when we were talking about Minneapolis. Why are we allowing this to happen? If you got a guy working on behalf of a foreign power, basically to set our country on fire, and he's working through people on our soil and bank accounts that are here, why does any of that exist? Why isn't it torn out by the roots? Why are you back down to letting these guys set the country on fire, and then some poor Border Patrol guy has to try to figure out in the heat of the moment how to deal with the chaos on the streets? Why don't we at a strategic level, a systematic level, tear this out? And are we doing it? No, we are 100% not doing it.
The one thing that we try to do here is share facts, truth, and moral clarity. Get above all the noise. I think what is said here today with what we're talking about with Israel, what we're talking about with Minneapolis, we cannot allow these foreign and this dark money to divide us and to separate us and make us believe that we're each other's enemies. That is how they win. We've got to lower the temperature. We got to be wise in times like these. Patrice, I appreciate so much what you do, what Raynard does, and Sam, it's always a pleasure to have your wise voice to really break it down to us about what the threat is and what we need to do, especially with our own laws and infrastructure to counter it. And so thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. We're out of here.